All right, so at the party, I gave this talk last week to a conference in Latvia, and they ended very depressed. So I hope not to depress too many of you. My apologies in advance. Our goals for today, I call them our learning objectives, if you will. You're going to learn about what IMSI catchers do and how they work. I'm going to talk about some detection strategies, so how you can tell if you're connected to an IMSI catcher. And then you're going to hear an exciting tale and adventures of my adventures in Las Vegas. And hopefully you can learn about how to avoid being caught up in any sort of IMSI catcher device. So, hi, I'm Jeff. I'm a security engineer at Security Innovation. I do AppSec, pen testing, and advisory services at sort of all areas of the SDLC, helping you build secure products. I used to be a high school teacher, a prison teacher, and a university teacher. Ask me which one I liked better. You have to ask later. But I hope you guys will be as captive an audience. I work from home 100%, so occasionally they let me out of my basement to put on pants and be seen with you in public. So I've traveled all the way to Toronto, from Toronto. So let's talk about what exactly an IMSI catcher is. Really, when you hear IMSI catcher, hear rogue cellular device, rogue cellular tower, if you will. To capture cell phone data or traffic. They're often used by police and governments. The most popular brand of IMSI catcher is the Stingray. It's made by the Harris Corp. There's others. The IMSI itself is your International Mobile Subscriber Identity, which is your unique cell phone ID. It's a unique identifier. There's a couple of them. You have one for your SIM and one for your phone. Sometimes they rotate. And what's interesting about IMSI catchers is often there's very strict NDAs between the vendor and the person they're selling them to, the police or governments. So it often prevents the users from disclosing any details about how they work or what they do. Even if you're putting in a warrant to request surveillance on someone, you just have to say that you're requesting to surveil them and not necessarily what devices or technologies you're using. So that can sometimes, it's very difficult to find information about some of these devices, and it often comes out in court documents years later after the fact. Here are some pictures of them. The top left is the most common one. That's the Stingray 2. And there's newer models and stuff like that. You might see them sort of laptop size, or you can get them as small as, that's a homemade one on the top right. Or you might see them as a large surveillance vehicle with a massive antenna with obviously a larger reach. Their specifications, often you see, for instance, in the top left one, you see multiple antenna jacks there. That's because they can intercept 2G, 3G, or 4G communications simultaneously, as well as CDMA versus GCM, which are the two types of networks you might be on. So they can launch attacks requesting devices to connect over over a weaker channel. So you could easily just block or jam the LTE specs, for instance, and then force them to connect over 3G or 2G. They operate in what's called either passive or active mode. And passive mode is you wouldn't even see it emitting any traffic into the air or any frequency into the air, which simply captures everything out of the air. And all available traffic. So sometimes over lower protocols that are not encrypted, you can capture unique subscriber information. There's active mode, which is more like a proxy. If you think about like a web proxy, it acts as a full duplex proxy, forcing all traffic through the device, then onward to a normal cellular tower. What these devices do is they try to say, hey, I'm a cell phone tower, connect to me as many devices as you can. And they advertise their range as being very large so that other devices can, so that more and more devices can connect to it. And what happens is that creates the one sort of choke point, and then that's being forwarded on to one other cellular tower. And sometimes you can have issues with availability in terms of if someone dialed 911, they might not get through if one of these devices was being used. So that's a very dangerous concern. Anyone from Citizen Lab here? No? Nobody? Okay. Anyone familiar with Citizen Lab? They do some great work. Yeah. They write a report. So this report was out on capabilities of IMSI catcher. So this talks about different ways that they're being used. So some of these are pretty scary. So confirming the presence of a device in a target's home prior to the search thereof. So if you had a warrant for somebody's house, you'd want to make sure this, and let's say they're a drug dealer and they do all their business on the phone, you want to make sure the phone was in the house before you search the house, you can do that. Identify an individual response for sending harassing text messages. There's documented cases of this. So the Citizen Lab report that I'm quoting here has all the explanations for all of these. Locating stolen mobile devices as a precursor to searching the home. Say, oh, there's a stolen mobile device in there, therefore we should search it. Locating individuals, so you could literally drive around the entire city until you find that one device you're looking for. They do get mounted on airplanes by the United States Marshal Service and fly over areas, just capturing, and that's like a flyover, and they know where everyone is at that moment. Sorry, I know I did say depressing. They've been used to monitor devices within range of a prison to see if prisoners have smuggled in any mobile devices. They've been used at political protests to capture everybody who attended a protest. So if you just happen to be at a protest, maybe you would be visited later to say, hey, what were you doing over there? And then there's been cases where it's been monitored other governments or other government officials to see who's communicating and being talked about. So all the sources on more explanations of that are in the report. I'm just mentioning it as a bit of warm, fuzzy background for you guys. Here's two other stories. In Baltimore alone, there were, through court documents, they documented 1,400 cases in the last, I think, 7 years. And what was interesting, when an organization went out and heat mapped all of these, or geographically mapped all of the incidents, and then mapped out against the population demographics, they found that they were predominantly used in black neighborhoods over white neighborhoods. So it shows a racial bias of use in these devices. And then since 2007, there's been thousands of incidents of them being used in Florida, which is where Harris Corp is located or headquartered, for things as small as hanging up on a 911 operator. I know we're all feeling really great about ourselves right now so far. If you want to know more about the capabilities, the manual was leaked just a couple months ago. So it is available to you. It speaks interesting to the capabilities of these devices, what they're able to do, how they're used, operated, their environments, stuff like that. There are newer versions since this leak, but it is available to you. And where do you buy them? Well, unfortunately, you have to be a government or police agency or military to buy one, unless you go on Alibaba and you can get one for $200-300. Good luck, I wish. There's import laws, and with Alibaba, you're the buyer, you're assuming all the risk. Some people have success with it. And a lot of the devices I saw were 2G only. Some of them you could probably find an LTE one. Again, you're taking some gambles, so how much is it worth the risk for that amount of money for you? And then this was 2015, someone said you can build your own for $1,400, and here's the how-to. Just last week, somebody hid one inside of a printer, and if you got in within range, it pulled up and it would call you and say, I just called to say I love you. And then, or it would print out every text message it received. So those are some really just like headline grabbing stories that the media will pick up. Oh, your printer could be a rogue cell phone tower now. And you'll see that in the headline. I guarantee you see that in the next couple of weeks. Because the story sort of just came out this week. I really don't care about new ways to build IMSI catchers because I think they're a pretty dangerous technology. What I do care about is ways to detect and help users be aware of these technologies so that you can hopefully not be caught up in these nets and hopefully stay safe while using your device just around town. So I say I care about finding these things, but there really aren't any good strategies for determining if an IMSI catcher is in the neighborhood. You wouldn't know if I had one in my backpack right here. Do I have one in my backpack? You wouldn't know. You wouldn't, if you look down at your phone right now, you wouldn't know if you were connected to an IMSI catcher. Or you wouldn't know if there was one in the room passively capturing all of the data. So your strategy for finding these things is warlock your neighborhood, and make note of all the cell towers in the area. Do this a number of times until you're sure you've got them all. and then constantly monitor your neighborhood to see if any new devices pop up, and if those devices pop up, go find them. So that's not a really great strategy, but it's the only one we have. Sorry, again with the depression. There are some tools to help you out. OpenCellID.org is a database of mostly user-reported cellular devices, their locations, and their identities. Problem with that, it's self-reported. So if I was a government agency and wanted to deploy a IMSI catcher, I would just report it to that as well. Android IMSI catcher detector app is a tool used to collect cell data. It tells you which tower you're connected to. This is the one I used in my work. And it requires a rooted Android device, so that means you're probably not going to use it on your regular device, so you need to carry two. And then while I was doing some work at DEF CON trying to find these devices, we'll get to that story in a minute, Eric Escobar built a $50 device that is a GSM for detecting devices and for triangulating them. So his is probably a little more accurate than a mobile device, like a mobile phone. So for $50, you could build a couple of these, plant them around your neighborhood, and then you could find any new devices that pop up. All right, so story time. So I went to DEF CON this year. People have been to DEF CON? Good number. I did this last week and there was nobody, so I had to explain a little bit more about DEF CON. People who've heard of DEF CON, it's okay if you don't raise your hand. Don't be shy. DEF CON is a security conference where all the cool kids go to learn about hacking. And it's gotten to be, well, there's a lot of cool kids now, so it's kind of crowded. So maybe you don't want to, maybe this is where the cool kids are. I would argue that way as well. Pandering to the home crowd? No? So it's a collection of hackers that get together to talk about security stuff. And before you go to DEF CON, and fair warning to everybody else, everybody warns you about how dangerous the networks in Las Vegas are during Black Hat and DEF CON. There's a lot of hackers there. Watch out. Accounts range from it being a hostile network to the most hostile network on Earth for your devices. Now, as a hacker, when I hear the most hostile network on Earth, I think, can I think of a more hostile network? So I thought about it, and I would think that in some areas or countries, if you tweet against the ruling regime, you might get a visit. That would seem to me like a pretty hostile network. I'm thinking of others. I remember the Arab Spring, where people were getting shot at by snipers for trying to videotape police surveillance or police brutality. To me, that would seem like pretty hostile networks. So when I hear the most hostile network on Earth, how do I compare these? So my question was, does Vegas during DEF CON line up with those? So this past DEF CON in August, I set out to determine if I could quantify at least find evidence of the hostility of the network. Now, for me, I decided to narrow my scope from the entire network to just focus on the GSM cellular network. So could I find evidence of any malicious activity on the GSM network? That was my question. So before I get too far into answering that question, you need to bear with me or I'll go with a little bit of a rant. Personally, I pride myself on being someone who cares deeply about the security and privacy of just regular people and who use the internet. One of my core values is to help people stay safe online in their daily activities. I also feel that as a hacker or a security professional, someone with subject matter expertise, it's my job to share that information to help others. All that being said, what are we doing for the family or wife and husband who go on a vacation to get away to Vegas, just happen to book a vacation during that week of DEF CON? Are they to be unknowingly swept up in the dragnet of mass surveillance and exploitation that occurs at these conferences? So personally, I took steps to protect myself. I got a burner phone. I didn't bring any corporate assets. When I got home, I wiped my device, and all's good. Regular people don't do that. So if they are going into the most hostile network on Earth, and they're not taking these precautions, are they to be exploited? Are they to empty their bank accounts? Or you hear random stories about people bringing ATMs and putting them on the casino floor to capture credit card data, right? These myths grow and become more extravagant every time the story is told. So I like to think of the people who are just in Vegas who happen to be there during DEF CON. I often find myself striking up to conversations with these people. I'm a pretty friendly guy, maybe you can tell. The conversations would lead to why I was in Vegas. I'm here for a hacker conference. Hi, I'm a hacker. And they'd get scared, and I would try to reassure them that there's no reason to be scared, but maybe don't use the hotel wireless this week. And I'd offer them other advice and helpful tips to maybe keep them a little more secure, not just that week, but in the rest of their lives. I'd witness other people do the same sort of thing, maybe in a more dramatic method than me. I was trying to be the nice guy. They were like, oh, don't use the network. Oh, no, you're going to get hacked. But really, at the end of the conversation, the end result was the same, and that was they were scared of me because there was all these hackers around, and you think about how media portrays hackers and what we are viewed as in society. And then, even though they just had a really great conversation with me, other people are telling them different stories, they still leave the conversation feeling insecure and afraid. To me, like that makes me feel pretty shitty. So as hackers and security professionals, I think that we're doing a disservice to the industry if this is how we're perceived in the world. And personally, I'd love to be able to say, hey, while you're in Vegas this week, 5 minutes already, we started late. You're kidding me. No? Okay. We're doing a service to the industry if this is how we treat people. So I'd love to be able to say that the HackerNet is the safest network on Earth because of the hackers in Vegas this week. So use that one, but that's not the case. I'm going to be overtime. So before DEF CON, I had this vision in my head, and the vision was I wanted to find an IMSI catcher. I wanted to find this rogue device. So I'd walk around, in my mind, I had this vision where I'd walk around Vegas and I'd walk around my phone, I'd find it, and I'd identify this rogue device. And then I would walk up to this person and I would say, can I see it? All right? Can I see what's in that backpack? I'm curious about your IMSI catcher you're using. And they're like, they would drop their jaw, like, how did you know I had one of those? And to me, that would either be the best possible game of Spot the Fed or the worst. And if for those not familiar, Spot the Fed is a game you play at DEF CON where if you can identify a plainclothes federal authority, you win a t-shirt, they get to go sweep the parking lot. You just have to recognize that there's a lot of people that come in plainclothes to hear about what's going on in the hacker underground or try and get people drunk to talk about all their O-Day exploits and stuff like that. So I thought that would go really well. Talked about how hostile it is, most hostile network on the earth. This is, we're talking about what I did. I set this up. I used the Android IMSI Catcher Detector app, my burner phone. You can sync with OpenCell ID, but I didn't. It wasn't working quite well for me. In Vegas, that's our big chance for our company to get together. We work all over the world, so we all come together. We go over dinner. This is me war driving the strip in a limo. And then, so I arrive at Vegas ahead of DEF CON, enjoy some much needed vacation, and then do a little war walking before the conference starts of Bally's and Paris, which are the two hotels that it's predominantly at, looking for known devices in advance. That way, when I finished the conference, I would know which devices I had seen and hadn't seen before. So I could say, like, okay, I got my baseline, and then I've got my new devices. Those got to be IMSI catchers. Let's go find them. So I found the real-time analysis and exact location pretty tough. So my determination was, okay, I'm just going to collect all the data and analyze it afterwards. So here's what I found. Please don't freak out. I don't want to scare anybody. Here's my before, here's my after. So that's alarming. At first glance, I would agree. But the reality is, to the casual observer, this looks really bad. I was skeptical of the data, however. I thought, no way, there couldn't be that many IMSI catchers in DEF CON that week. And as I analyzed the data, I started comparing my results with OpenCell ID. Remember, that's self-reported. So some of these were already known to OpenCell ID, so I could exclude them. And what I'm reasoning is, what you find is that some of these, like some of these 3 ones right here, might be around the same location or some little groupings. Well, some of the cellular devices I found out have multiple antennas to handle better load with each their own unique ID. So unless you were walking the area dozens and dozens of times, it would take you a while to get a really good baseline of all established devices. So some of these I had to exclude right away. And I used OpenCell ID to remove some of those. You had other issues. GPS issues could be an issue as well. And multiple redundant devices, or devices on multiple floors even. And what was left was 14 devices. My apologies, the red dots are a little small. But 14 devices that were not known to OpenCell ID, that I didn't see in my preliminary walk, that were there throughout the time that I was in DEF CON. Does that mean there's 14 IMSI catchers? I don't know. And that speaks to the danger of these devices. I can't confirm, unless I go and track down each one of those, I can't confirm whether they're legitimate or not. And that to me is a problem. So another story, the 3 nights before DEF CON, I was staying in Caesar's Palace. It was really nice. Pro tip, next time you go, slip $50 to the concierge and you get a nice room upgrade, usually works pretty well. So I was in the Augustus Tower, which is right there. And what was weird was throughout the night, I got alerts whenever my device switched networks. So it was switching networks every couple minutes. I was getting lots of alerts. It was keeping me up. Not that I was sleeping much anyway. So what I noticed was that all of these devices were just outside my window. That's amazing. So what it suggests to me is a bit of a drive-by attack, which means I talked about they have these things in planes and vehicles. What if somebody was driving down the strip and catching that throughout the night? That would suggest that's the case. So I looked through OpenCell ID and I excluded some more, and I did find 4 that were confirmed not known to OpenCell ID that I hadn't seen previously. There were also another couples that were only been seen once or twice. So I think in this case it's reasonable to assume that something weird was happening, but I can't confirm it. I never actually saw an IMSI catcher, so that's a big challenge to me. So those are here's what I saw. I didn't really, sorry guys, there's no conclusive evidence. I suspect there was probably some IMSI catchers, so it's the depressing part of the show, I'm sorry. The defense is, how do you not get swept up by one of these devices? They can read your text messages, they can intercept calls, things like that. Well, if your personal threat model is concerned about them, then maybe you need to take additional steps. If you're not, and you're just going to tweet your picture selfie in Las Vegas anyway, maybe it's less of a concern. So you have to decide what your personal threat model is, how much you care about your security, and what actions you can take to protect yourself. You could just not use your device. Now, arguably, if you were going to a political protest, that might be good advice. If you were just wanting to walk around the town, that's maybe not reasonable. Wi-Fi calling with a VPN, so maybe non-DEF CON times, you might be safe using the Wi-Fi network and connecting with a VPN, doing Wi-Fi calling that way. I don't think you'd be caught up in an IMSI catcher in that regard. If you're concerned about your text messages being read, I would recommend using Signal, Open Whisper for text messaging, and you can even do calls through that. You would still be tracked in terms of who, when, and where you were calling, but it would be more difficult for the contents of your messages to be read. I think it would be really great if all wireless carriers publish the tower IDs. Then you could at least know if the ID matched or not. At that point, the devices would have to evolve to account for spoofing. And it'd be really great if the wireless carriers, anybody working at a telco here, if you could implement mutual authentication between tower and cellular device. So right now, The tower confirms that the device has access to that network and is authorized to use the network, but the device doesn't confirm that the tower is legitimate. So if we had mutual authentication, it would go a long way to making your devices more secure. Some conclusions. The devices are really hard to detect. This sucks. This is parts of what makes them so dangerous, and you rarely know when you're connected to them. All the data I collected is available on GitHub. Shameless plug for tomorrow night. I'm hosting a CTF. I hope you find it very accessible. It's a web application CTF. Should be a lot of fun. Ask me questions about it or anything like that. And thank you.